Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entry Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. Before we dive in, if today's conversation challenges you, sparks a new idea, or sharpens how you think about the world, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who enjoys staying curious. Today, I'm joined by Brian Couzens, the CEO and founder of SITG Consulting. Brian works at the point where PQC readiness, financial services, compliance, and credibility intersect. His focus is on helping organizations navigate the quantum era with governance, discovery, independent validation, and technical validation frameworks that stand up to forensic scrutiny. Brian, it's lovely to have you here with me today.
Thank you.
Brian, you often argue that quantum risk is not a technical problem, but a governance failure waiting to happen. What do most boards still misunderstand about the nature of this risk, in your opinion?
I suppose most boards still think the risk is PQC. It isn't. The real issue is the cryptographic estate. It has no owner, it has no accountability, no visibility, and no life cycle management for 30 years, maybe more. Right? Nobody even knows why half of what they have is there in the first place. And that's a scary bit. Okay. Quantum and PQC didn't create this problem. What it did was expose it and amplify the problem. So if a board can't see that a core trust function has been ignored for so long, and I mean decades, then quantum isn't actually their biggest risk. The governance model is within that organization. This is a common theme that we keep seeing running through organizations as well. They just don't know the governance models don't work.
Let's be hypothetical for a moment. If a breach caused by broken cryptography happens, let's say 10 years from now, who should be held accountable today and why?
Great question. Because nonchalance is the curse of governance, of course. It's also the curse of accountability. So half the issue with PQC is getting people to take responsibility for something they may not be around to see, and also that they weren't around when they implemented it. But that doesn't change their duty of care, right? So if long life data is stolen today and decrypted, let's say in 10 years, 20 years time, the accountability sits with everybody on that board between 1990 and 2036. It casts across it. They all benefited from digital trust, but none of them wanted to own it, none of them mapped it, and none of them managed it. So the failure isn't the future breach, it's the decades of leadership that treat crypto as nobody's job. And this is the issue today. Everybody thinks it's the Cisco. It's not. It belongs to the board. And my view is it belongs to the CRO. This is a risk transformation. This isn't an algorithmic transformation.
So just on that, what is the most dangerous assumption executives make when they hear post-quantum cryptography?
The most dangerous assumption for sure is it's not my problem. It's not going to happen this side of Christmas. It's the one we hear every day. It's the one we see in print most days. Now, I think that's calming down a little bit and people aren't getting the message, but people keep thinking that PQC is something that the tech team will sort out and they'll sort it out next year later. And it's something that only matters when quantum computing, quantum machines come along. Let's be clear. This isn't a risk. It's an issue. It's going to happen. We keep calling it a risk, but it isn't. It's an issue. We know it's going to happen. So we have to fix it. And there's not going to be any excuse about that. PQC isn't the problem. The problem is that nobody knows what crypto they have, why they have it, who owns it, and how it's managed. PQC, it just forces that conversation. And they've avoided this conversation for a long time. So if anything, quantum computers before their arrival should be hailed for bringing this to the forefront. Yeah, they should be celebrated, really.
It is an interesting problem. Crypto has been this kind of invisible resource that we have consumed for over 30 years without having to pay for it or really bother about it. It just worked. It was a transparent layer in the background of the technology stack.
It was a feature.
Yeah, a feature. On that, Brian, you frame cryptographic resilience as a fiduciary obligation. At what point does ignoring PQC cross from kind of ignorance to negligence, in your opinion?
it is a fiduciary issue. This is not something boards must be held accountable for. So if your bank lost your data and then it allows others to decrypt your data because of this, and they did nothing, even though they knew about it, they knew this issue was coming along, who should be held accountable? Yeah, it's so blatant, it's so obvious. It's quite scary that we have this ignorance going on and that people are so afraid of this problem. So yeah, it's definitely a fiduciary obligation, and it sits with the board and it sits with the exco. Ignoring PQC stops being ignorance the moment leadership understands the basic facts. And I think most PLCs, global PLCs, or Fortune 500 companies know about the basic facts of this problem. Long-lived data, long-life data, it's already been collected. The estate, it has no owner, no accountability, no visibility. There's a trend going through these questions, isn't there? Yeah. And the work can possibly take years. I read from IBM, depending on the size of the organization, anything from 3 to 12 years. Now, so if you're choosing not to act, you have, in effect, crossed into negligence. Okay. And at that point, it's not a knowledge gap. It's not something you can say, I didn't know about it. It's a decision to leave a known issue sitting on the table, or just to lie in the estate waiting for something to happen.
You said something there, Brian, about at the point when boards understand the problem, and I think that in itself can be a problem, because a lot of board members are non-technical. They understand maybe the top 5 revenue generation systems, but when it gets to cryptography and quantum and these things, it might feel like they have to buy some hardware or do something else, and it's not really clear to them. So how should boards be asking about cryptography differently than they do about cybersecurity more broadly?
Yeah, I think they need to understand they're two different things. Cybersecurity is the hamster wheel. Yeah, it's operational. It never stops. It detects, it responds, it patches, investigates, repeats. It's an operational cycle. It's the day-to-day grind that never ends, unfortunately. Crypto, that's structural. Okay, it's the foundations of the house. It's the structure, and if that structure is cracked, and the house will leak forever. And if you don't fix it, little plug for Brian Hale, with a suitably qualified tradesman, someone who actually knows what they're doing, the leaks never stop. Okay, they get worse. And no amount of detect and patch will save you if the foundations are wrong. And remember, we can't patch this. Yeah, we can't. If somebody breaches, once they've breached crypto, it's gone. It's open. It's wide. Yeah, you can't go back on it and say, oh, give us the data back. We'll fix it now. It's out there. And I'm not undermining the CISOs or the good work they do, but the issue doesn't belong to the CISO. This is a board level structural obligation. And I can't say that loud enough. It is not an operational firefight. So the questions can't be the usual cybersecurity ones. They need to be structural questions. What do we rely on? Who owns it? When do we have it? What happens if it breaks? Because when it fails, everything built on top of it will fall through with it as well.
And that I suppose that is interesting. I often see posts on LinkedIn, and they start with something like, these are the questions the board should be asking their management team. And the board are never going to ask those questions. You know what I mean? So,
if boards don't separate the structural risk from the operational noise, they're going to miss the real exposure. And because crypto is the thing that it is, whether we like it or not, it's holding the whole thing together. It's quite scary that it's not that regulators haven't jumped on this yet, but they're not going to.
Why do you think that is?
Because regulators aren't, they don't preempt anything. Yeah, they very rarely. Even if we go to previous crashes, booms, crashes, GDPR, the regulations only come in after. They never come in before. I've never, or rarely, I've spent my life putting in regulations and compliance and frameworks, but rarely, if ever, will a regulator be proactive. They'll always be reactive, and their response will always be, "Well, we expected you to do that. We expected you to protect the data. That's a duty of care."
I suppose that's where DORA and NIS2 and these other kind of regulatory aspects come in with some of the statements around keeping abreast of quantum analysis, etc., cryptographic analysis, etc. And they're light touch, but there is facets in there that you could say point back to the duty of care, as you put it.
Yeah. I think it's improving. But was it the World Economic Forum, and the week before we had the G7 or vis-a-vis, and the G7 said, "Oh, you've got to take this seven seriously. Quantum risk, it's got to be taken seriously." And then the following week, the World Economic Forum said, "Yeah, it is serious, but you really need to deal with AI first." And it's like, wow, you know, and it's probably the same people in the same meeting rooms, but that was not necessarily a conflict, but it was certainly different stories or diverging stories in which direction you should go to. And the thing is, I mean, I don't want to get into it now, but AI, quantum, data lineage, structural risk, they're all combined. Zero trust. You can't have one without the other. And now they're here. We've got to take all of those on board as well. And I think one of the biggest fears is no one is ready. It starts getting bigger now. What did I call it? A legacy can of worms. Because that's what it is. There's so much legacy there. And it's not technical debt. It's crypto debt. And it's scary.
I'd actually make a prediction, and I might be reading this back or looking back on this in 2 years' time and going, why did you say such a thing? But I actually reckon because of the speed AI is being put in an organization, those solutions will become your biggest headache for post-quantum migration.
I think so. I mean, I talk to various organizations and colleagues in the industry, and everybody's using AI now. They're using AI even to detect the CBOM. They're sending agents off. But the lack of control. It's like there's a death wish out there for a lot of organizations. They just throw these problems. I mean, there are no silver bullets. And people need to realize that.
Brian, you've written about Harvest Now, Decrypt Later, which industries are most exposed to that threat, and why are they still under reacting to the problem, in your opinion?
I don't think we can single one out. Okay, so I'd say all of them, because someone somewhere wants something from one or all of these sectors: healthcare, banking, telecoms, government, etc. And they're not moving with any real urgency. That again, this is because they're all treating it like a tomorrow problem, and they're assuming that crypto, they've got will somehow, it'll hold out. They won't have a problem. But if I had to call out one sector, I'd probably, if you put me right on the spot, I'd say healthcare. Why? Because the data has such a long shelf life, and it's some of the most valuable and sensitive information they can see. Because everybody always looks at this with financial eyes and the banking and everything, and I'm, from a financial services background myself, so I can see why the banks are going to have struggle there. But here is a real problem. And also because so much of the infrastructure within healthcare cannot be upgraded. Yeah, they're stuck with it. They're going to have to and they're not going to throw away $1 million, MRI machines because they can't upgrade the crypto. So I think there'll be a lot of aftermarket products coming along at some stage. But Harvest Now, Decrypt Later, it only works because organizations are leaving data sitting behind old legacy cryptology. It's only there because of that. And once they've got it, they've got it.
Let's talk a little bit about data longevity and quantum timelines. How should organizations be thinking about this as the timelines start to shift closer to that 2030, 2035 mark?
Okay, so let's I think let's keep this simple. You don't need a quantum timeline to think about data longevity. You just look at how long the data actually has to matter. Take the UK. NHS medical records are kept for the lifetime of the patient, I believe, plus eight. Okay, plus 8 years. Around 100 years. Right. So that's decades of exposure baked in before you even start talking about quantum. Okay, that exposure's there. Harvest Now gives you that exposure. Singapore, I do some work in Singapore. The immigration records, visas, passes, residency history, entry exit logs. They're kept for as long as they're legally. This was the phrase they used when I asked how long do you keep the data for, as they're as legally or operationally required. Okay, which is a scary answer in itself, which in practice means decades, because they use for renewals, checks, investigations, citizenship decisions. So it may be that one department keeps it for 20 years, another one keeps it for 50 years. So that the timeline debate is the wrong question. If the data has to survive longer than the crypto will, you're already inside the risk window.
I'm gonna pull in that timeline thread just a little bit. So if an organization is waiting for definitive timelines on when a cryptographically relevant quantum computer arrives, is that a rational strategy or an excuse for that organization to sit on their hands?
I don't buy the idea that anyone's genuinely waiting for a timeline. Nobody's that strategic, unfortunately. It's usually just a way to avoid spending money or making those tough decisions. To be blunt, waiting for some official date isn't a strategy, is it? Really, it's stalling. It's people kicking the can because they don't want to deal with the cost. They know it's going to be hugely disruptive, and the politics are fixed in the crypto because these people, they're smart and they know they're opening up. And again, I'll use that expression I used a minute ago: a can of legacy worms. You know, think of it like this: if you knew a flood was coming, but you didn't know the exact time the dam would burst, you wouldn't sit there waiting for the water to hit you, would you? You'd move your gear to higher ground. And the whole will act when we have a date thing falls apart for those three simple reasons. Attackers are already stealing your data. They're holding it until they can break it later. So if your data needs 10 years of protection, you're exposed. All right. Big organizations, they already move painfully slow in everything they do. And so a full crypto overhaul, as we've already covered, can take years. If they wait for the start date, you're already too late. And regulators, this is my belief, won't accept we didn't have a timeline as any sort of defense. It'll just look like they were not doing their job. It's that simple.
It's a good perspective, Brian. I want to talk a little bit about C bombs for a minute, cryptographic builds of material. Why is visibility into cryptography arguably more important than visibility into software vulnerabilities?
Okay, so let me be clear now. I am not a CBOM expert. Okay, I am not a technical expert, but I would say crypto visibility isn't more or less important than software vulnerabilities. It really just depends entirely on the context and what you're trying to achieve and protect. You need all of it in the end. You need the software view, you need the hardware view, and then you need the crypto view on top of that. Let me be clear and honest. The point is simple. You can't secure what you can't see. So you've got to go and find it all right? And if you're talking about PQC, then, everything we know is a CBOM isn't optional anymore. It's a must have. And just as a point of interest, I don't know whether you know this now, Francis, but CBOMs, they're called cryptology bill of materials. They used to be called certificate bill of materials. Okay, so it's just all the certificates, but it got changed as quantum came online, and now they've been renamed. But the idea hasn't changed. You need a clear map of what you're actually running. So the reason people get so hung up on crypto visibility is because it's the one part of the system that can age quietly, age without anyone noticing. Whereas, like software issues, I think they're much more visible. Something breaks, something crashes, something gets flagged. Crypto doesn't do that. It just sits there quietly in the background, getting older, like me, maturing with age until one day it's not strong enough anymore.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Brian. I think S bombs have been problematic for organizations for years already. It's back to it's an issue versus a risk problem. You've got 80% of an environment that you haven't scanned since the beginning of time, and then you scan it, and all of a sudden you've got this. Have I got a massive exposure? Have I just got a load of problems? Are they false positives? You've got all of that. I think with a C bomb, it's far more detail orientated, and from my perspective, when I look at the C bomb advice, I kind of have a lens to say, don't suck everything in and create a C bomb. Start with your important business systems and take an architectural driven view. I think I've used the term slop before, a significant list of problems if you suck everything in and just dump it out again, because where do you start? You'll smother in data. So I think from the architect in me will say, start small and work up, whereas S bombs are a little bit different in that regard, because you need to understand where your dependencies are in terms of the libraries and algorithms, etc., that you need to change in a system, and what are the technical dependencies that surround that system, and can they withstand the larger byte size, etc.
So one of the main things that matters is what is most at risk and why. Is it my long-lived data? Is it that some of the data is exposed the moment it moves? Is it that some data is exposed the moment it's used rather than moved? Is it that some data has no value after one day, etc., etc.? Yeah. So the priority isn't discovery versus governance versus migration. The priority is understanding which data will hurt you the most if it's harvested now, right, and decrypted later. So once you know that, in theory, the sequence takes care of itself. And if you start with the budget question, the only thing that you're really doing is optimizing for cost. If you start with the risk question, in theory, you're optimizing for survival. So that's the difference. But this is far from ideal. Either of those approaches, I would always prefer to do it in a much more controlled way, and both of them will create additional risk.
So you talked earlier, Brian, that this risk should really be owned by the CRO. And then we talked about what questions the board should be asking, and how, at what point will the board understand the problem. But from my perspective, a lot of the problem is being driven from security within the organization, even though it's not specifically a security problem, because people hear cryptography, they hear trust, they hear all of these terms, and they go, well, that's the security guys over there. What advice would you give to a CISO who understands the quantum risk but is unable to get the executive buy-in?
It's never the tech, is it? It's the framing, for sure. Execs, they're never going to move on the word quantum. Never. But what they will move on is words like exposure, liability, accountability. You're going to prison if you don't do this. Yeah. So we've got to stop using the words quantum. I mean, this is the fear factor, isn't it? A lot of this comes to what people were doing previously, which was, scaring people into submission. So you've got to stop using the word quantum. Why? Because your boards, whenever you say the word quantum, they're just thinking future. Yeah, it's not today. So I suppose the line that lands this with is, are we creating data today that we may be or that we're unable to protect tomorrow? So you tie it to obligations they already sign off on. All right. So this is GDPR. This is what regulators are saying. This is NIST. Yeah. So you can tie it to that. But we've got to be clear. This isn't a new risk. It's just unrecognized non-compliance. In my opinion, you can quantify it in business terms: long-lived data, systems that can't be upgraded, third parties holding encrypted archives. But then you drop the only sentence that matters is any of this is intercepted today, we will have no control over future decryption. So you don't persuade them. You should force them to make that decision. So 1 page, here's the exposure, here's why the controls fail over time, here's the impact window. They'll either accept it, mitigate it, or they own it. Okay? You can start with visibility, not migration, because we don't know where our exposure is a governance failure. And that's how I would approach it.
When you look back a decade from now, what do you think they'll say organizations got wrong about this moment?
If we move forward a decade from now, I think a decade from now, people will be all saying everybody waited too long. Everybody. There's a bit of a buck pass on this particular issue, isn't there? Everybody's blaming everybody else. There's the blame for the legacy, right? For the debt that we've got, the crypto debt. Everybody's blaming everybody else for that. Then we've got the vendor excuse. This is the vendors. They never told us this. We never signed up for this. In terms of in 10 years now time, yeah, everybody will say everybody reacted too late. I think that will be the end game of this. Crypto, we are now shifting from technical control to the board level risk function. It is improving. I think encryption won't be treated as static anymore. It becomes more time bound, degrading controls that organizations are accountable for. And I think regulators are starting to converge on the same pressure points. You must know where your crypto is, what data it protects, and how long it will stay secure. And I think that will drive the structural changes. But in terms of in 10 years from now, I think the main message that will be seen is that we didn't do enough when we knew the problem was there, and we didn't do it soon enough.
Before we finish up, what early signals should we look out for when it comes to this problem?
So I think I think we're seeing it now. So I do a weekly newsletter. So if you read that, you'll see the early signals are already there if you're paying attention. So if you don't read it, Francis, I want you to start reading it from this week. All right, and I think also regulators are now shifting. Nothing's in law yet, but they are shifting from vague, appropriate controls language to explicit expectations around planning, around transition, and around long-term protection. They're starting to take on board, laws like GDPR, which we mentioned before, over decades, not months. And that's the first sign, I think, that the horizon is moving or has moved. At the same time, I think vendors are starting to be pushed to move crypto transparency and agility, not just say what they've always said, which is, yeah, you're safe, we use encryption. Okay. And I think the market is starting to demand evidence now. Right? So I use the word urgency, but it's wrong. We're starting to see something happen. It is on the increase. Additionally, we talked before about standards bodies, G7s, economic forums. They've stopped debating if the change is needed. They're now outlining how and when, or when they view it is. The issue we have still, though, is conflicting stories every other day. Yeah, it'll be 2030. No, it'll be 2035. It'll take you 10 years. No, we can do it in 6 months. Then we have these wild vendor claims that we can make secure in 15 minutes. We do need clearer direction. I think there are some good organizations that have been set up behind this now. You got PKIC, you've got QSEC. There's various organizations that are doing good work. I do a little bit of lobbying, a little bit of influencing with regulators, but they've got their plates full. But it will take a big breach before somebody puts this into concrete. But I think going to those questions that we're starting to ask, I think when those questions start appearing consistently, the shift from abstract to urgent will have happened.
Brian, it was absolutely lovely having you on. And if anyone wants to find you, you're on LinkedIn, of course, under Brian C. And people can look up your company website. And it was a real pleasure to have you on the show. And I think there's a lot of little nuggets in there that hopefully people will reflect on and get some value on over the coming months as they start their cryptographic resilience programs. Thank you very much.